In the autumn of 1440, the people of Nantes gathered to witness an execution that would haunt France for centuries. The condemned man was no common criminal. He was Gilles de Rais, Baron of Brittany, Marshal of France, companion in arms to Joan of Arc, and one of the wealthiest nobles in the kingdom. Behind the stone walls of his castles at Tiffauges and Machecoul, investigators had uncovered evidence of systematic atrocities so horrifying that even hardened soldiers struggled to document them. The trial records would later reveal that over a span of nearly 8 years, dozens of children had vanished into those fortress chambers, never to emerge alive. What transforms a celebrated war hero into a methodical killer remains one of history's darkest questions. The same hands that once wielded a sword for France alongside the Maid of Orleans had orchestrated acts that the presiding bishop called more cruel than any Saracen or barbarian. As the prosecution presented their evidence, castle servants testified to scenes they had witnessed, describing systematic brutality conducted with the precision of a military campaign. The court chronicler Jean Chartier would write that the testimonies caused such horror among those present that many could not bear to remain in the chamber. The rise of Gilles de Rais, nobleman turned war hero. Born in 1405 to one of Brittany's most powerful families, Gilles de Rais inherited vast estates before his 16th birthday. His grandfather, Jean de Craon, molded the young nobleman into a formidable military commander, teaching him the arts of war and statecraft. By his early 20s, Gilles commanded his own forces, demonstrating tactical skill that caught the attention of the French crown. His wealth was staggering. Contemporary records indicate he controlled over 15 major castles and fortresses across Brittany and Anjou, along with lands that generated enormous annual revenues. In 1427, Gilles de Rais entered the service of the Dauphin Charles, the uncrowned king struggling to reclaim France from English occupation. When a peasant girl named Jean arrived at Chinon claiming divine guidance, Gilles was among the commanders assigned to her army. He fought at her side during the relief of Orléans in May 1429, leading cavalry charges that broke the English siege. Witnesses described him as fearless in combat, his blue and gold banner visible at the front of every assault. The coronation of Charles VII at Reims Cathedral in July 1429 marked the pinnacle of Gilles' military glory. The king elevated him to Marshal of France, one of the highest military honors in the realm. He was 24 years old, wealthy beyond measure, and celebrated as a hero throughout the kingdom. When Joan of Arc was captured by Burgundian forces in 1430, Gilles withdrew from active campaigning. The chronicler Perceval de Cagny noted that after Joan's execution in Rouen, the Baron de Rais returned to his estates and was not seen again at court for many years. Tiffauges and Machecoul, castles converted into chambers of captivity. Gilles established his primary residences at 2 fortresses in the Loire region. Tiffauges Castle, perched on a rocky outcrop overlooking the Sèvres-Nantes River, was a formidable structure with walls nearly 3 meters thick. The castle featured multiple towers connected by narrow corridors and a complex of underground chambers originally built for storage and defense. Machecoul Castle, located 40 kilometers to the west, was equally imposing, with fortified gates and a layout that allowed complete isolation of the interior rooms from outside observation. Between 1432 and 1440, Gilles transformed these castles into something far different from typical noble residences. He dismissed most of his hereditary household staff, replacing them with hand-picked servants bound to him by wages rather than feudal obligation. The Italian mercenary Henriette Griard and the cleric François Prelati became his closest confidants, managing the daily operations of both castles. Gilles established strict protocols. Certain chambers were declared off-limits to all but his inner circle. Servants were forbidden from entering the tower rooms without express permission, and castle guards were instructed to prevent unauthorized access to specific corridors. The isolation of these fortresses served Gilles's purposes well. Both Tiffauges and Machecoul stood distant from major population centers, surrounded by forests and agricultural lands where his authority was absolute. Local families depended on the Baron for employment and protection. When children began disappearing from nearby villages, parents hesitated to voice suspicions about their overlord. According to trial testimony, Gilles' servants would recruit victims by offering employment as pages or servants in the castle, promising families that their children would receive education and advancement in the Baron's household. Witnesses later described a systematic process of procurement. Gilles' agents, particularly a woman named La Meffray, known in local villages as a procurer of household staff, would approach impoverished families with offers of positions for young boys. Parents were told their children would learn courtly manners and perhaps secure future positions in noble households. The children would be escorted to either Tiffauges or Machecoul, ushered through the main gates in daylight, and then led to the restricted tower chambers where Gilles waited. Once inside those rooms, they would never leave the castle alive. Torture methods inside the castle chambers of Gilles de Rais. The trial of Gilles de Rais in October 1440 produced testimony from his former servants that revealed the systematic nature of his crimes. The prosecution's case rested heavily on depositions from Henriette Griard, Etienne Corillot, known as Poitou, and other members of the household who had participated in or witnessed the atrocities. These men described a pattern that had continued for years. Children brought to the castles were taken to specific chambers in the towers, rooms that Gilles had equipped for his purposes. The depositions detailed acts of extreme violence conducted in a methodical, almost ritualistic manner. Henriette Griard testified that Gilles employed various methods of inflicting suffering before ending the lives of his victims. Binding and elevating them within the chambers was described as a common practice, leaving victims helpless while Gilles proceeded with further torments. The servants stated that Gilles would often spend extended periods with his victims, sometimes entire afternoons before their deaths. The trial records indicate that suffocation was frequently used as the final method of execution, though victims were subjected to extensive brutality before that point. These sessions took place in the upper chambers of the castle towers, rooms that could be secured and isolated from the rest of the household. The testimony revealed that Gilles maintained specific implements in these chambers. Iron hooks, cords, and various restraining devices were kept ready. According to Poitou's deposition, Gilles would personally select tools before summoning a victim to the chamber. The servants described their role as assisting in the restraint and disposal of bodies afterward. They testified that Gilles showed no remorse during or after these acts, treating them as regular occurrences within the castle routine. One witness stated that Gilles once remarked he derived greater pleasure from these deaths than from any worldly honor or victory in battle. The disposal of remains presented a logistical challenge that the household managed with disturbing efficiency. Bodies were initially concealed within the castles, hidden in chests or storage chambers. Later, under cover of darkness, servants would transport them to various locations. Some were burned in the large castle fireplaces, reduced to ash that could be scattered. Others were buried in unmarked locations throughout the castle grounds or in nearby fields under Gilles' control. Trial testimony indicated that castle chimneys sometimes emitted unusual smoke late at night, and servants described the smell of burning that would permeate certain sections of the fortresses. The scale gradually became apparent during the investigation. When authorities finally searched Tiffauges and Machecoul in September 1440, they discovered physical evidence that corroborated servant testimony. Bone fragments were found in ash pits near the great fireplaces. Stains that could not be fully scrubbed from stone floors told their own story. The examining magistrates documented locations where earth had been recently disturbed, suggesting burial sites throughout the castle grounds. Contemporary records suggest the victims numbered between 40 and 200 children, though the exact count remains uncertain. The trial focused on charges related to approximately 40 specific cases where witnesses could provide names, dates, and details of disappearances. Jean Chartier wrote that the number of innocents who perished in those chambers exceeds what any man could bear to chronicle. The systematic nature of the crimes, conducted over nearly a decade within the security of Gilles' own fortifications, suggested a mind that had transformed military discipline and organizational skill toward purposes of unfathomable cruelty. The fall and execution of Gilles de Rais at Nantes. Gilles' downfall began not with the child murders, but with a separate act of violence that gave authorities jurisdiction to investigate him. In May 1440, he